guys, my name is Matt Moore, and so honored to be with you guys today as you continue on in your course here on youth ministry. And man, what an exciting time. I know for some of you, maybe you're young and you are pursuing this call of God on your life. For others of you, maybe you have been in the youth ministry field for a while, and maybe you're just doing as a refresher or continuing to learn, and I love that. Like I said, my name is Matt. I'm so honored to be with you guys. Just to give you a little bit of my story, my journey. I have been involved in youth ministry now for actually about 20 years. Believe it or not, I know you're thinking that I'm way too young to have been doing youth ministry for 20 years. But 20 years, 18 of those years have been in full-time youth ministry. And I am actually currently, I reside in Bayside Community Church, a multi-site church in Southwest Florida. And I moved here 18 years ago to help plant this church. And I'll never forget, we started the church, and our very first youth service, we had exactly 4 students show up for it. And today we are a church that has 8 locations across our area with about 12,000 in average weekly attendance. And it's just been exciting to be a part of that journey and see how God has grown the church and continue to expand our ministries. And I really have a heart for student ministries. It is near and dear to my heart. Like I said, I moved here to help start our youth ministries, and over the last few years, I've really operated more in kind of an executive role over all of our youth pastors across all of our locations, and really just feel like the season of life that I'm in, that God is really calling me to invest in other youth pastors and young leaders. And so I really am honored to be a part of what God is doing here in Ireland. And so I just want to take a few minutes, and I want to really kind of dig in today and talk a little bit about student leadership. Talk about really why it's so important, but also talk about how, right? Practically, how do you build a healthy and a thriving student leadership team? And so let's dig in. I encourage you to be a note taker. Hopefully you've got a notebook out, you've got something handy, because note takers are world changers. And so I want to talk a bit about the how. Before we get into the how, today I really want to kind of set this up by talking about the why. I believe before we can get into the nuts and bolts and the practical, we really need to understand the why behind student leadership. You know, as a leader, I would encourage you with this. I would encourage you not to write anyone off because they're too old or because they're too young. I remember when I was first kind of stepping into this role, overseeing other youth pastors, and we had a youth pastor at our church who was young in his role. And I remember one day we were talking, and we're talking about leadership and what it means to be a youth pastor. And I remember the topic coming up. I said to him, I said, hey, listen, man, I said, I noticed that anytime I'm at your youth services and your experiences, all of your leaders seem to be like in their teens, like late teens, early 20s. Why is that? And he told me something that kind of surprised me. It kind of took me back a little bit, to be honest. And he said, well, man, listen, if they're over like 25, they're not relevant to work with students. And I thought, oh my goodness, dude, where did you hear that? Who told you? And the reality is that another leader, had just honestly given him some bad advice. And basically this young youth pastor was writing off volunteer leaders in his ministry because they were too old. Hey, they didn't check the box. You're over 30. Yeah, sorry, I don't need you. And I remember having this kind of come to Jesus conversation with him and explaining to him why that was such a unhealthy approach. And I thought back to the years of me doing student ministry. And most of the time when I was in student ministry as the youth pastor, can I just tell you, a lot of my leaders were actually older than I was. And so I thought it was incredibly dangerous, because adult leaders are super important to your ministry. I know I said we're going to talk about student leadership, but let me just say this for a second. Adults are incredibly important to your ministry. They bring credibility with parents, especially if you're a young leader. They're going to bring credibility. They bring mentorship. They bring stability. There's a lot of value that having adults in your ministry will add to your student ministry. So definitely don't write off leaders because they're too old. On the flip of that, I think sometimes we can write leaders off because we think that they're just too young. You know, over the years, we've had other churches or youth pastors come in and they've seen what we do when it comes to student leadership. But I've had youth pastors and lead pastors make comments to me like, man, this is so impressive, the way that you utilize students to lead, but man, it's kind of scary. Like, I don't know if we can do that. Or, I mean, aren't you worried they're going to mess up and they're going to make mistakes and they're going to fail and they're going to get it wrong? And my answer is, no, I'm not worried about it. Is it going to happen? Absolutely. Inevitably, they're going to mess up. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to get it wrong. But man, this is a great environment to create and help them to develop and grow as leaders. So I think student leadership is so valuable. In fact, a few years ago, I'll tell you this, I took a group of middle school students on a missions trip to El Salvador. And this is an entirely middle school student trip. And so they were all, between 11 and 14 probably. And I'll never forget, we're down in El Salvador and we are doing all kinds of incredible missions things. We're working in orphanages and local schools. And these kids would get up and share their testimonies and how they had given their life to Christ and what Christ had done inside of them. And it was a powerful week. I mean, they were getting up in churches and preaching messages and they were doing like physical manual labor projects and painting and fixing people's homes. And it was just a really cool thing to experience. But I'll never forget this moment that happened at the end of our week there in El Salvador. We're sitting down at lunch with this pastor of this church, pretty good sized church there in the capital city of San Salvador. And through a translator, of course, he says to me, he says, how old are these students that you have here this week? So I go on to tell him, hey, they're all 11, 12, 13 years old. And can I tell you, this pastor was completely just blown away. He said, I've got to tell you something. He said, we have always, here in my country, this is not just our church, but here in our country, we have always focused so heavily, when we say student ministry, for us, we've always focused on those who are 16 and up, 16, 17, 18, 19, even into their early 20s. He goes, we don't really do anything for this age group, this kind of middle school age, these tweens, if you will. He said, we've never really utilized them. He goes, but can I just tell you, we have been so inspired this week by what they have been able to do on the ground and the way that they just confidently and boldly share their faith and how they serve and how they lead. And he was just completely blown away by what was happening, so much so that he told me that after that trip, he was inspired to start a ministry that really kind of focused on these younger teenagers. So listen, I just want to encourage you with this. Don't write off a leader because they're too old, but also don't write off a leader because you think that they're too young. Again, adult leaders, they're essential. They're going to bring wisdom, they're going to bring mentorship, they're going to bring credibility with parents. They add a lot of value to your ministry. Student leadership is just as valuable, but for very different reasons. And so let me give you a couple of these. Again, I said, get out your notepads, write these down. Here's the first reason why I believe student leadership is so valuable to your church and to your youth ministry culture. And that is because student leadership will exponentially grow your student ministry. Student leadership will exponentially grow your student ministry. Listen, when your students make the transition from attending to feeling like they own it, from attending to owning the ministry, the level of buy-in that comes into what you're doing will increase. And the result, the byproduct of that is going to be that you're going to see growth start to happen in your student ministries. To be honest with you, in the early years of youth ministry, when I was trying to grow our student ministry, and I guess we've all been there, right? We all are wanting to know, how can I reach more students for Christ? And I remember in the early years, for a good season, I focused heavily on what I now refer to as the 3 G's. The 3 G's. And let me give these to you. Write these down. The first one is guilt. Guilt. And so maybe some of you have experienced this. Maybe you've been a part of a youth ministry in your life where you've experienced this. Maybe some of you have even done this. And I want to just be clear in saying, no judgment. This is the no judgment zone because look, I have done this before. I have resorted to guilt to try to grow our student ministries. And if you've ever heard things like this said before, or maybe you've said them, hey, listen, if you guys don't tell your friends about Jesus, they're going to go to hell. Or, hey, your friends are the only Jesus you are the only Jesus that your friends may ever see. Or things like this. How about this one? How about, hey, if you don't bring your friends to the youth group, or it's your job to bring your friends to the youth group, not mine. Right? If you've ever said those kind of things, or if you've ever experienced those kinds of things, really what it is it's the leader projecting guilt onto the students to try to grow the student ministry. In my experience, it's not very effective. It's really not very effective at all. Because here's the deal. The motivation was driven by this, right? And let me say this. Usually, for me, and probably for you, if you've done those kind of things, usually the motivation is pure, right? Like the truth is, man, we just want to reach students for Jesus. And how do we do that? But oftentimes, we go about it the wrong way. And so sometimes the motivation was pure. Again, right? I was just trying to reach students for Jesus. But sometimes that motivation would come from a place of pressure. And we probably all have felt this pressure. If you're new and you maybe haven't even stepped into this role yet in youth ministry, let me just tell you the pressure will come. Sometimes that pressure comes from our leadership, of feeling this pressure to grow and to reach more students. Sometimes that pressure comes from our peers, right? Maybe you've been in this scenario where you're hanging out with some peers, some fellow youth pastors, people in youth ministry, other church leaders, and the first question you get is, "Hey, what's up, man? Hey, how many kids do you run in your ministry?" Right? I know that's a huge thing here. I found myself doing that over the years. And that's like the first question is, how many kids do you have? And I think what happens sometimes as a result of all of those things, we start to feel this pressure. And so oftentimes we project that pressure onto the very students that God has entrusted us to lead because we want to grow and reach more students. But if we can just be honest for a second, guys, guilt is not a great motivator. It's not. And the truth is this, even if you can get somebody to do something for a season because guilt is driving it, it will be short-lived. Because guilt is not a good long-term motivator to get people to do the things that we need them to do or that we want them to engage in. Passion and ownership will always, always, always be better motivators. In fact, I'll give you an example of this that maybe will make sense. And so growing up, I grew up in church pretty much my whole life. And I remember in my years as a student, as a teenager in youth ministry, I remember constantly hearing people stand up in a pulpit, preach a message, talking about how dating is wrong. Don't date, it's wrong, it's not God's plan for you, just don't date. And also about purity, hey, don't have sex before marriage. But here was the thing, I never really understood why. It was always driven by this, well, God says don't do it, so don't do it. It's just wrong, don't do it. But it was always driven by this sense of like kind of guilt and heaviness and condemnation until I remember one time, this guy who was a guest speaker at the church that I grew up in, he said something that I had never really heard anybody say before. He's talking about the same topic that I had heard preached about dozens of times. He is talking about dating the right way. He is talking about abstinence until marriage. He's talking about those things, but here's what he did. He didn't use guilt or heaviness or condemnation as the motivator. What he did instead was he would say things like this. Guys, I promise you, listen to me. God's way is always going to be better than the world's way. Listen, hey, I promise you, if you date the right way, you're going to experience a lot less heartache, a lot less pain, a lot less drama. Hey, listen, if you'll just trust me and wait until you're married to have sex, I promise you that it's going to be so much better and fulfilling and just less issues you have to deal with and less things you carry into your marriage. It's going to be better. Can I tell you that when he said those things, something on the inside of me just kind of clicked? Because it was no longer just a guilt thing. It was no longer like a condemnation. It was motivating me. Now there was like this motivation internally to say, wait a second, maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's something better. Maybe what this guy is saying has some truth in it. That was a much greater motivator. Can I just be honest with you? Passion and ownership when it comes to students reaching their friends is always going to be a better motivator. And he would always, the funny thing is this, so he would set up this thing and say, hey, God's way is better, and I promise you, but he would always end it with, the choice is yours. You can choose to date the right way. You can choose to date the way the world does. You can choose what you want to choose. The choice is yours. The ball is in your court. Did you see the difference there? Look, there's a huge difference in projecting guilt and promoting the outcome. There's a big difference, right? So even in the context of trying to grow our student ministries, there's a difference in us trying to guilt students into reaching their friends versus us talking about, man, if you'll just own this ministry and you'll see it as your ministry, and then they start to feel, I want to reach my friends. Like, I want to see them come to know Jesus. I want them to experience this relationship with Christ that I have. Guys, look, guilt is not a great way to grow your student ministry. The second G, right? I said the 3 G's. The second G is gimmicks. Gimmicks. Look, can I just tell you, I feel like I have tried every gimmick in the book to try to grow student ministry. We did a lot of things. One of the things we used to do, I would call it the bait and switch kind of technique. And in fact, I remember I was out at one of our campuses a few years ago, and they had promoted this big event. They told all of their normal attendees about it. They printed up flyers. They put it out on social media. And they promoted this big, fun event. And they promoted it as there's going to be awesome giveaways. There's going to be a lot of fun games. Like, we're going to give away a gift card. Like, it's going to be free tacos and free bottles of Coke and like everything. Like, so they promoted this an event for students as this big, fun, awesome event. So students show up, and here's what happened is this. We pulled a little bit of a bait and switch. Students came, and a lot of unchurched students who had not ever stepped foot into that church or the youth ministry, they came. But here's what happened is they get there, and as they get there, guess what they experienced? They didn't walk into this incredible hype, fun event. Instead, it was a service. And it wasn't just a service, it was very focused on churched kids. If I'm being honest with you, the worship team takes the platform and they start worshiping, going after it, which is great. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but they do like 30 minutes of worship. And it doesn't even get to the point where they go into a full message and a sermon, and they do all of like a full worship church service. And then at the back end, they did a couple of fun games and they had some free tacos but it was more of an afterthought. So the very thing they had promoted is not really what they delivered. And I'll never forget this moment. I'm out at this campus, and I'm excited because I'm like, man, look, this is packed. This is more students than they have ever had before. It was a full room. But there's this group of guys, probably 5 or 6 guys, sitting in the back row. You could tell they were kind of like the cool crowd. They looked like the athletes, the jocks. They weren't typical church type kids that we would label as church kids. And they're there. And I'll never forget this. They get about 2 songs into the worship set. And this whole group of guys, they get up out of their seats and they start walking towards the exit. And I see the youth pastor of this location. He goes over there. He engages with these young men and basically is like, hey guys, what's going on? Why are y'all heading out? And we got some fun stuff coming up and it's going to be great. And the response from these guys broke my heart. The response that I heard one of these young men say is, hey man, this isn't what we signed up for. We were told this was going to be this big, fun, hype event, but we're here and this is just a church service. We're not interested. And they walked out the door. My hope and my prayer is that experience, didn't ruin them from church. It didn't ruin them from giving God another shot or another try. But the truth is, we actually did an injustice to these young men and countless others because we pulled this bait and switch. We used a gimmick to get people in the door, but then when they came in the door, we didn't deliver on what we said we were going to do. Gimmicks. Gimmicks don't work when you're trying to grow your student ministry. I'll tell you one more story. I remember this was probably 2 years into the church here as a youth pastor. And man, I was trying to think of everything that I could possibly think of to grow the student ministry. And I will never, ever, ever forget this. So I had this idea that at the time I thought was genius. When I say it, you're probably going to go, wow, that guy's an idiot. And he's up here teaching us about youth ministry. We often learn, right? Sometimes the best teacher is our own failures and our own mistakes. So anyhow, so I had this genius idea. I'm trying to reach more students, and I'm going, man, how can we reach more students? And so I have this genius idea to stop doing worship altogether. Right? Because worship is for church kids. And I'm like, I want to reach unchurched kids. So what if we just stop doing worship? So I set up this meeting with this young guy in the church. He was probably like in his early 20s at the time, a couple of years younger than I was. And he was a musician. And I said, hey, listen, I got this idea. Would you come and lead worship for us? But I'm like, it's not really worship, because here's what I want it to be. I was like, I don't want it to be churchy at all. I want you to, so I said, I want you to do covers. And back in the time, I don't know if you're young, you may not remember this, but there was a season kind of like in the early-ish 2000s where emo music was like the thing. Emo, screamo, the screamo music. I don't know if you remember that. Dashboard Confessional, those types of bands were huge. And so I said, here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to do any church music. I don't want you to do any worship music. I don't even want it to be Christian music. I said, I want you just to do covers of all these screamo bands. And that's going to help us to reach a whole new demographic. We're going to reach unchurched kids like never before. I mean, I literally sat across this guy at a restaurant. I'm casting the vision. I believed it, thought it was going to be incredible. Can I just be honest with you now? That was one of the stupidest decisions that we ever made. We actually saw the opposite effect. Instead of reaching more students, we started to see a decline in our growth. Gimmicks is not the answer. The third G, write this down, giveaways. Man, we did. I'm going to be honest with you. I'll just be super real with you. We did. We tried to entice students. We tried to bribe students. I mean, we did. We resorted to bribery to try to get more students. We would do things like, hey, whoever brings the most friends to this service or this event, we're going to hook you up with a free shopping spree. Or, hey, we're going to give you an iPad or an Xbox. Or we would try to kind of basically bribe kids. Hey, bring your friends and we'll give you something in return for it. After a couple of years of trying to grow our student ministry this way with little to no result, we started to understand something, that if we wanted to grow our student ministries, we had to change our approach. In fact, I'll never forget this. One night, we had our high school service, and I'm sitting in there and we're worshiping and my hands are lifted, but if I'm being honest with you, I wasn't really engaging with God in that moment. I kept looking behind me and I kept looking back at the door and I kept looking back at all of the empty seats. And I'll never forget this moment. It was kind of like God just kind of like punched me in the gut, I guess. And I had this moment where I felt like God said to me, you're so worried about the students who aren't here. You're so worried about all these empty seats. But are you going to effectively pastor and love on these students who are here now? Are you going to be faithful with what I've given you? And I made a choice in that moment to say, God, I'm going to be faithful and I will be the best pastor of these kids that you've given me, even if no other students ever show up. But two things changed that night as well. We started to change and to shift our approach. And so all of a sudden our approach changed and we shifted it and we said, wait a second, maybe the guilt and the gimmicks and the giveaways don't really work. And so we started to understand that if we really wanted to grow our student ministries, that we had to create environments that students wanted to come back to, and we had to empower our students to lead. Can I tell you this? That when we started doing these two things, the outcome, the result that we saw was exponential growth in our student ministries. The second reason why student leadership is so essential and so valuable to your church and to your ministry is because it is raising up the next generation of church leaders. Raising up the next generation of church leaders. Now, I know some of you are probably going, hold up a second. Like, I'm not thinking that far down the road. Like, why do I need to be worried about that right now? Why does that even need to be a focus? Can I just tell you that I think so often in the church, too often in the church as a whole, the church, the global church, this has been our approach. We get so focused and caught up in the right now, the here and the now, and what am I building, that we neglect to think about the future and building the church to outlive us. That's really the test of true leadership. Are you building a ministry that will outlive you? So why is it important? Why does that matter for me right now? Because listen, the truth is success without successors is a myth. Hopefully wherever you're watching from, hopefully there was a bunch of amens that were said. I hope you wrote this down. I hope you underlined it. Let me say it again. Success without successors is a myth. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to go over to Japan, and we were connected with an incredible church, incredible ministry in Japan. And it was very interesting, though, because they explained to us that of the 126 million people in the country of Japan, that less than 0.5% of them were Christian. And at first, that didn't really surprise me. I thought, well, yeah, and I go, it's a Buddhist country. They haven't been exposed to the gospel. They've never heard. And so I kind of asked that question. I'm like, that's the reason why, right? Has the gospel just never really been shared with the people of Japan? And the next things they said to me really kind of just changed my entire perspective. They said, no. They said, actually, after the war happened, they said the country opened up and their country was flooded with Christian missionaries who planted churches all across Japan. In fact, they told me that there were 7,000 Christian churches in their country, but that most of those churches were completely empty, and the ones that had people in them, they all had gray hair. So as I began to dig a little bit deeper and try to seek understanding, and hey, help me understand, why is that? They said that here's what happened. So missionaries flooded the nation. The nation was open. They were receptive. People were giving their lives to Christ. They were exposed to the gospel. But no one ever thought about investing in the next generation. No one ever invested in and raised up the next generation. And so Christianity has all but died off in the country of Japan. All because there was a neglect to focus on the next generation. Can I just share this with you? I believe that it is our responsibility as Christians, as leaders in the body of Christ, that it is our responsibility, and honestly, it's our mandate to raise up the next generation of church leaders. And if we don't, there are serious consequences that go along with that. Honestly, the future of the church depend on it. A couple of years in the student ministry, I started to get a little more intentional with this idea of student leadership. And here's what it really was, guys. To be honest with you, maybe this will help some of you, because it wasn't like this elaborate system or this grand vision that I had. Initially, it was just me going and picking a couple of students, 2 or 3 students, that I saw potential in, that I saw promise in, that I saw a heart after God. And I said, hey, I want to start a student leadership team. Would you come and be a part of that? That's how it all got started. And because of that decision to be intentional about investing in the next generation of leaders, now we're at a place today where if you were to walk into one of our campuses, especially, let me give you an example. If you were to walk into our main campus on any given weekend and experience our middle school service, that's like 11 to 13. If you were to experience that service, here's what you'd see. You would walk up to the doors. You would experience all the greeters welcoming students and people at the doors of the auditorium. They are students. You would walk in. You would see like our cafeteria and hangout area. The people working that cafeteria, they're students. You would see students connecting with and engaging with first-time guests and new students. They'd be connecting and hanging out with them. You would then, as we got into the service flow in the auditorium, you would notice that up in our production, all of the people running cameras and lights and audio, AVL, almost all of them are students. And then if you were to look up to the platform during worship and you were to see the worship team, those leading worship, those singing, the drummers, the bass players, the piano players, you would see that they are all students. You would even hear MCs come up on the platform, and guess what those MCs would be? Students. On some weekends, you would even hear the message being preached by a student. And I know that sounds crazy. Like most people come and they experience, they go, oh my goodness, like this is incredible, but how did you even get to this place? We got to that place by simply making an intentional decision that we were going to be about investing in student leadership. That we were going to start to raise up the next generation of leaders. And here's the beautiful thing that has happened. I don't even think I really understood this when we first started it all those years ago. But I could tell you countless stories of people who started with us when they were 12, 11, 13 years old in our student leadership program, who now have become a pipeline for the church, our church, and even other churches around the country. Young people who started with me at 12 years old, 13 years old as a student leader, who now are pastors, who are missionaries, who are worship leaders, who serve on a creative team at a church. And I believe a lot of that is because we decided at a young age to not write them off, to not say they don't matter, they're not valuable, they're just a kid. But we said, no, let's call out those leadership potential in them. Let's call out those giftings and those things that God has called them to. Let's start helping them to develop those things right now. I think about this. I think about a young man who was serving. He started serving when he was just a 6th grader. He was in 6th grade, and he was one of our student leaders, and we got him to start leading a group, like a small group on his campus of his school. And he started leading this group, and from there he kind of grew, and I saw this potential coming out of him as a communicator. And so we let him MC on our youth services, and when we had some retreats, we would let him share these little short sessions that we had prepared. And ultimately, this young man at the age of like 16, 17 years old was preaching messages from the main platform of our student ministries that were being broadcast to all of our other campuses. And I'm going to tell you, he was incredible and a dynamic communicator. But it all started with us making a choice to intentionally invest in the next generation. Listen, can I just tell you that whether you're currently a youth pastor, whether you're an aspiring youth pastor, maybe you're just a youth leader or a parent and you're wanting to learn more about students and how to pastor young people, I want to encourage you as you're thinking about building your student ministry or starting your student ministry, can I just encourage you to try to build it with the future in mind. Try to build it to outlive yourself, because the true indicator of success is not about your social media post. It's not about you being able to get a bunch of followers following your ministry or yourself. True success is not based on how many students are showing up to an event that you do. That's great. We want to reach young people. Numbers matter. I'm not saying that. But the true test of your leadership, the true success of your ministry is going to be, did you build a ministry that outlives you? If you were to build a ministry and then remove yourself from the equation, will it still be healthy and thriving even after you're gone? Listen, building a culture of student leadership, I believe, is one of the most valuable and the most important things you can do. Honestly, for those of you guys, maybe you're new in this role, maybe you're just starting out, again, maybe you haven't even got started yet. I would encourage you, as one of the first things to do as you're starting to build a student ministry, would be to start to build intentional student leadership. What does that look like? Right? So we've talked about the why. We have talked about why it's so valuable. But how do you do it? Practically, I'm a systems guy, I'm a structures guy, I'm a practical nuts and bolts kind of guy. So how do you build that? We're going to dig into that. And I know we have another session coming up, and I'm going to really dig deep into the practicals of how you build an effective, healthy, thriving student ministry. But before we do that, I do want to kind of leave you with this final thought for today. I want to talk a little bit about empowerment. And this is really a principle, I would say, that applies across all leadership. But as a youth pastor working with students, I want to encourage you to be intentional in the way that you empower other people. Let me kind of give you an example of what I think this looks like. I think so oftentimes as leaders, there's really two types of leaders. There's a leader we're going to put that leader down here, okay? And this leader down here, this is what I would call the tight-fisted leader. That is the leader who holds on tight to everything. They don't empower others. They don't give opportunity to others. They literally just hold on tight to everything. And if I can be honest with you, the reason why we lead that way is one of two reasons. One is out of insecurity. If you find yourself holding on so tight to everything and not giving ministry away, it might be that you have some insecurities as a leader. Can I just encourage you to deal with those things now? Because if you are insecure as a leader, that will ultimately end up hurting all of the people around you. So deal with that insecurity. Another reason why we have leaders who are tight-fisted and they hold on so tight to everything and they don't empower, they don't give anything away, is because there's this mindset of like, well, hey, I just know I can do it better. I can do it better. I can do it more effectively. I can do it more efficiently. Look, those things, they might all be true. Maybe you can do it better. Maybe you can do it more efficiently. Maybe you can do all of those things, but in the process, you're not empowering or raising up other people. Look, can I just look at Jesus? When Jesus was on this earth and he had his followers and he had his disciples, you don't think that there were times where Jesus could have just done it better? I assure you he could have. There were multiple occasions throughout the scripture where you could go, my goodness, Jesus, why didn't you just do that yourself? You could have done that better all by yourself. But instead, you chose to bring these guys along with you and let them learn and give them exposure and give them experience. You let them fail, you let them mess up, but you gave them opportunity. So there's the tight-fisted leader, okay? And whatever the motivation is, that is dangerous, and you will not keep quality and high-level leaders around you, and you'll never be able to truly help others develop and grow in their leadership. So you have the tight-fisted leader that lives down here. Then you've got another leader up here, right? And the leader up here, they are what I would call the over-delegator. The over-delegator. Maybe you're this kind of a person, or maybe you've been around leaders or under leaders who are this way. This is the person who thinks they're an empowering leader. They would say, man, I give away everything. And they do. Maybe a little too much, right? This is the person who literally, it feels less like empowerment and more like I'm just delegating and giving stuff away that I don't want to do. Let me tell you something. This is huge. Write this down. There is a big difference in empowering somebody to lead and delegating tasks. There's a big difference. I'm going to say it again. There's a big difference in empowering somebody to lead and delegation of tasks. So we need to be the kind of leaders that are about empowering other people. And if we're constantly just giving stuff away all the time because we don't want to do it, that's not really empowerment. That's just laziness. And we probably need to check our heart. So in the final few minutes that we have today, here's what I would like to do. I want to kind of help you maybe understand what this empowerment could look like. So if we have leaders who are down here, who this again is the tight-fisted leader, insecurity or whatever the motivation is, they are not going to ever build other people. And the problem with that is that it hurts people and people get hurt in the process, and we're never raising up the next generation of leaders. The over-delegator up here, who is constantly giving stuff away without any real coaching, without any real empowerment. Here's what I would encourage you with is this. What if we led a little bit different? What if we lived somewhere in between here? What if as we led people, what if it looked something more like this? What if we had a new leader, a student leader that we're raising up? And this is true, let me tell you, this is true for your adult leaders as well. This is not isolated to just student leaders, but it's true in student leaders and adult leaders. What if we did this? What if we had a leader and the process looked more like this? So we gave them an opportunity, right here. We give them an opportunity and then we coach them. Apologize for the bad handwriting. We coached them. Then after coaching them, we gave them another opportunity. And we just kept on doing this. So we literally, it almost looks more like a staircase, a very funky, odd, weird staircase. Again, I don't claim to be an artist. However, look, what if it looked more like this? What if we said opportunity, we coached them. We gave them an opportunity, we coached them. We gave an opportunity, we coached them. We gave an opportunity, we coached them. Opportunity, coach. Opportunity, coach. You get where I'm going with that. What could it look like if that is the way that we chose to lead? Now, how would that play out? What could that look like? Let me give you an example, a real life example of this. I am super particular about who I give a microphone to in a platform. Like, I don't just hand a microphone to somebody and say, hey, get up in front of people and preach or speak in front of people. And here's why I say that. When you give somebody a microphone in your environment, you're giving that person a whole lot of power over what happens in that space. So I've always been a little bit more cautious of saying, hey, I don't just let anybody speak from the platform, right? And so but I want to help people and young communicators develop and grow as communicators. How do I help them do that? Here's how you do that. You see that potential in somebody, or somebody expresses that desire and that passion. You give that person an opportunity. So maybe that opportunity looks like, hey, I want you to come up here next to me and we're going to MC the service. We're going to do a game together and explain the rules. I'll say this, you say that. Opportunity, I coach them in that. Hey man, listen, you did a great job. Hey, one thing, you said a lot of filler words. You said a lot of ums and uhs, or you were holding the microphone too far up your base. Hold it right up here. Whatever those things are, I take some time and I coach him. And maybe I let him live there for a while. Maybe he just does MCing and I coach him in that, maybe for months. Every person is different. But I see him growing in his ability to communicate, so what do? I give him a new opportunity. We have a pre-service huddle with all of our leaders and student leaders before service ever starts. And in that smaller group setting, I say to him, hey, next week, I want you to come and I want you to take 3 or 4 minutes and I want you just to share something with the team. It can be a thought on leadership or something God is speaking to you. Just share it with the team. And again, I give him an opportunity. Now I coach him in that. And maybe I give him some more opportunities in that same kind of vein. And as he grows in that, and I see that happening in him, I give him another opportunity, right? So I give him another opportunity here. Maybe I say to him now, hey, listen, we have a retreat coming up. And we have a session, it's a short session. It's like a 10-minute session. We'll have 30 students there or 50 students there. Would you be willing, here's the curriculum, would you work on that? And I want you to come and I want you to share that 10-minute session in our retreat. And again, I give him an opportunity, and now I coach him, right? And I let him live there for a while, and I coach him through the process. Then I give another opportunity. Maybe the next opportunity, one of the things we did, this is a huge win, by the way, if you're trying to develop future communicators. We did a thing in our middle school services, we call it 3 and 5. And we will let 3 of our student leaders that we handpick, each on a weekend, on a service environment, each of them will preach a 5-minute message with one of our pastors or leaders kind of hosting it. So maybe I'll give an opportunity to that. Hey, prep a 5-minute message, put it together, you're going to speak on the weekend, and then same thing. I give them that opportunity, and now I coach them in that. And I keep doing this. And so you get the idea. The idea is I give them opportunity, I coach. I give opportunity, I coach. I give opportunity, I coach. Ultimately, what I'm doing is that is what empowerment looks like, by the way. That is how you and I can be empowering leaders that aren't too tight-fisted, that are raising up the next generation, but we're not over-delegating and just giving stuff away without preparing people, because I've had that happen too. We've had people that we have sent out or said, hey, go lead, go be a pastor, go be a leader, but what we found out was they were in our system, but we weren't being intentional about their development, and so we didn't set them up for success. So here's what I'd encourage you with is this. When it comes to developing student leaders, we talked a lot today about the why. This, I believe, is going to set up the how, because next time when I'm with you, I really want to give you guys some practical steps on how to build a healthy and thriving student leadership team and culture. But I believe that the core principle has to be this idea of I'm going to intentionally empower young people to become the leaders that God has called them to be. And I can promise you this, if you and I will focus on investing in and developing student leaders within our ministries, God will exponentially grow our ministry and we will raise up the next generation of church leaders. We'll build ministries that outlive ourselves and leave a legacy for generations to come. Great being with you guys today. I look forward to the next time we get to connect.